Welcome to this penultimate video on the trumps, and here we have the Aeon card, one of my personal favourites. This particular card is really an expression of a lot of the major symbolisms of the Thoth deck. We have a lot of deities within this, and it's a departure from the Christian viewpoint of this particular stage that the Fool comes across, and in the traditional decks it's called Judgment. Aeon essentially means a long period of time, so you're looking at things like, if we look back on the history of man, we've got things like the Iron Age, Bronze Age, Industrial Age, Technological Age, so we're looking at a definite period of time, but over quite a span. We can also look at ages in terms of the zodiac. For instance, we've got the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, so you're looking at definite time spans here. Before I look at this card in detail, we'll just go through some divinatory meanings first. In terms of its divinatory meaning, the Aeon really means looking at those situations which have had a major impact on our life. So it's not the little things, the day-to-day things. This is big changes. At the extreme end of things, it could be like a near-death experience for some people, and this forces a change in their whole view of life. Again, health problems, even like the small things such as a career or a relationship, but something which within that change forces you to look at things in a much bigger way that will have a much bigger impact on your life going forward. So it can also imply a time to move on from a situation after seeing this bigger picture. And again, we have this principle of endings and new beginnings. It could mean taking time out to review your life timeline. I think it was done in the Celestine prophecy, and it's not unique to that, whereby one of the exercises in the workbook was to review your timeline and look at periods of major change. So again, this card could indicate that would be a useful exercise to do. So the Aeon indicates a natural period of growth where you're experiencing a deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you. It's a time of deep change, reflection, and evolution of our spiritual awareness. And this could also have like a knock-on effect for your life, because it could mean letting go of old friendships and structures in your life which no longer serve your greater purpose. So that is some of the upright definitions of the card. Reversed, we have more difficult situations. It could mean that decisions and endings are having a destructive impact. It could be due to our destructive habits such as addiction, poor career choices, poor choices in relationships, it's that we're unable to let go of those things which are no longer serving us, so we're trying to hang on to what we've got and not allowing the free flow of change and evolution in our consciousness to happen. It could be that trauma and psychological issues are hampering our ability to move forward through this natural cycle of change and renewal, and just repeating the same destructive life cycles without taking stock and learning from our experiences. Okay, so that's a little bit about the divinatory meaning of the card, and we'll now just look at its application for the Celtic cross. One of the major contradictions of these later trumps is that they have an awful lot of symbolism in them. They're very complex, and yet the principle which they stand for is actually very, very simple. Because your conscious is really describing a shift to your consciousness being more universal, and in that universal consciousness you see more of a unity. And yet ironically, with these cards, they have an awful lot of parts to them. So once we've dissected these parts, it's important at the end of that process to integrate everything into a whole. With the Aeon card here, it really represents a change in human consciousness, I think, as I implied in the introduction. So out goes the old sort of Christian era, and in comes a new Aeon, which is the Aeon of Horus. Having said that, as I'm going to go into in this video, the spiritual path is exactly the same whether it's Judgment or the Aeon. It's just, I think these represent a shift in the general consciousness of man. So the actual spiritual path is and always has been exactly the same, as I will attempt to show. So with that in mind, we'll go on to looking at the Aeon on the Tree of Life. So here we have a Tree of Life that I've drawn out specifically for the deck. We have the Aeon card in between the Sephirah Hod and Malkut. Hod here is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury again is associated with Mercury was the messenger between gods, so it's to do with communication, and also Hod is to do with higher intellect. So we have this higher consciousness here in Hod, which structures as well, and we have Malkut, which is made up of the elements, air, fire, water, earth, and essentially the Aeon card is an intermediary between these two. We talked a little bit in the definitions about the Aeon card being a shift in universal consciousness, and this is represented on the Tree of Life. For the Fool, he's oscillating between these two. By spending time in Hod, he's changing consciousness, ever evolving, and then reintegrating that into his earthly perspective. So essentially this is a step whereby we have the evolution of human consciousness and understanding in Hod, about the nature of our physical reality in Malkut. With this process, our consciousness becomes more universal as we see more and more of the oneness behind creation. So older perspectives are burned away by the spiritual fire, which is represented on the Aeon card, and we'll talk about the spiritual fire very soon. We'll now look at the Hebrew association of this card, and we have the letter Shin, which is here. So it is spelt S-H-I-N, Shin, but it's pronounced Shin, and it means tooth, and it is also the mother letter in the word fire, and fire is represented here by this upward pointing triangle. So we're going to just look at the relevance of these two, and the Shin here is represented on the card here, and we have form of Horus standing on top. So this is the letter Shin by its representation in the Aeon card. So there's like 3 leaf-like patterns here. This on the left is the mother figure, so we've got the female here, we've got the male here, and we've got the child in the centre. Okay, the important thing to take away from this is that the child, as you can see, is much brighter than his parents, and this again is represented in the main picture of the card, where you've got the child form of Horus here in the foreground, and we have another form of Horus here seated on a throne in the background. So there is something important here about the child, which can be related to this cyclical event, because essentially we're looking at the world with new eyes, the eyes of a child, when we go through these sort of wave-like cycles of time. So the letter Shin, meaning, or Sheen as it's pronounced, meaning tooth, is something which is destructive, and it makes something more useful so we can digest it. So that ties in with this, again, with this cyclical effect. It's also to do with communication as well, because if we looked on the Tree of Life, we had this rulership of Mercury here in Hod, so we have a link with the meaning of the Hebrew letter that way as well. In the background we have these these arches here, and that is somewhat symbolic of the sign of Libra, and therefore we have an association. This is the sign of Libra here, and we have an implicit association with the adjustment card, which is all to do with justice, making balanced decisions. And we have the Alpha and the Omega here. Here's the Alpha, and here's the Omega sign here. And indeed the goddess Nuit has the Omega sign here, which we'll talk about as well. So this is where these cards do get quite complex, because they link in a fair bit to other cards. We've also got different coloured arches here. Again, the green representing Libra, and the orange-red arch here. We've got this jagged line. You can see this. You've got a jagged line, and it goes all the way through. Jagged there, here, and here. And this is supposed to represent, again, this activity of fire, which is very important. And fire is an initiator of change, and we're going to talk about fire next. So we're already building up a picture that fire is a very important part of this card. These three on the top of the Sheen letter are Yods, which are to do with fire, because we can see this, for instance, in the Ace of Wands, where we've got the flaming torch and we've got these Yods coming from the wand. Indeed, this is probably not the only card with the odds in, but this just gives you an idea that this Aeon card is very active. So we're looking at this fire as being a spiritual fire. It's got nothing to do with the apocalyptic visions of traditional Orthodox Christianity as it being some sort of the earth is consumed by fire. It's a complete misunderstanding of what fire they're talking about. They're not talking about an earthly fire, they're talking about a spiritual fire. And this element is related to the meaning of the card, which is all to do with major change, and it's fire that burns up the old, and it's fire that burns our attachments to materialism, and it enables us to move forward spiritually. So this fire can be represented and has been talked about by people such as Alice Bailey here, where we have a treatise on cosmic fire, and it talks about all the different types of universal fire that occurs in the universe. It's very complex, very big. Or we can have fire associated with the microcosm. So this is really like macrocosm, and it's to do with universal fire. But inside man, there's also we've got the microcosm and the Kundalini fire, which goes up the spine and activates the higher chakra centers there. At the beginning I said that these are two distinctive eons here, and yet I said that the spiritual path is the same for both. But we just look at this quote from Matthew 3:11 from John the Baptist. John the Baptist says, "I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but that he that cometh after me," he's talking about Jesus there, "is mightier than I, whose shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire." This is a very good book to do with symbolism, and here are the planes of consciousness, which is essentially what it all talks about. This is the Greek model, where we've got earth, water, air, fire, and good mind. Good mind is the same as being reborn. So the baptism in water has nothing to do with dipping your head under water. It's all to do with the spiritual waters inside. I'll talk a lot about that on my site. If you want the Egyptian thing, we've got it here. Again, more of the Greek mythology, and we've got the Christian one here. Okay, so that's a fair bit on fire, and what we're going to do now is talk about more of the symbolism contained in the card. We'll look at the individual symbolism of this card now, and we'll start with Nuit here, which is this dark shaped archway, and this is the goddess of the sky, particularly of night, because you can actually see her, and she has these spiral galaxies here, which are the represents unlimited possibilities. She's like the canvas, the all potential. She has these anklets here, around here and here. With this right anklet here, you've got a wavy sign, and this one you've got like a pulse sign on the right. So there are two types. The spike pattern on it's her right and our left, represents the formed universe, and these resemble like the heartbeat, and the wavy lines supposed to represent the formless universe. So you've got the form and formless, the all potential, and the expression of that potential all within her. So she has those. She has these spiral galaxies. She's also in the form of the Omega, and we saw that in the adjustment card here. So we have the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So again, pointing to her all potential. And this, believe it or not, is found in the Bible as well. So in Revelations here, it says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." So again, this just shows that these two are representing the same spiritual process. So Nuit here represents, she's like the canvas on which all of these star signs are present. Again, for those that have read it, it's a book called The Labours of Hercules. And the Labours of Hercules are all about Hercules going through the 12 signs. So that whole mythology is about the progress of the soul through the different signs of the zodiac, and that's what each of the 12 labours are. Okay, moving on. I'm going to talk about Hadid next, which is this structure here. And you've got this essentially ball of fire in the middle, again that element of fire, and you've got the wings on the outside here. So this is Hadid, spelled H-A-D-I-T. So what's that doing there? Well, first of all, I'll just get rid of that so we can see more clearly now. Well, it's the top part of the caduceus wand here, where you've got the Ida and Pingala Kundalini currents here, and the Sushumna, which is a straight channel going down the spine, and you've got this winged globe on top. Here, this is from the Book of Thoth, and here Crowley just links it in with the Tree of Life. So the numbers here represent the various different Sephirah on the Tree of Life. So we've got Keter here at the top, and they come down in this pattern. Again, we've got this here, so this would be Hokmah, Binah, and this is the one essentially between Hod and Malkut. Sorry, writing is awful. Which is represented here. Okay. But the important bit here is this bit on the top here. So it's the top part of that structure. So Hadid representing Keter on the Tree of Life, which is the very top bit. That again is to do with spirit and the all potential, but here we've got the element of fire, which does the moving, and also the wings here. So there is an element of movement, because if everything was just potential, nothing would ever happen. We wouldn't have a universe. There has to be a will of the universe, there has to be a movement, and within this structure here we've got a phallic like structure, which again penetrates the body of Nuit here. So we have universal sexual alchemy happening. One of the confusing things about this card is you see the word Harpocrates written down for the figure in this card here. Harpocrates is a Greek term, and it's a Greek god. As you may possibly know, the Egyptians and the Greeks can interchange, with the Greeks coming after the Egyptian names. But here we stick to Horus, because this is essentially the tarot of the Egyptians, not the Greeks. And so the term for Horus in this particular card, Crowley says he has a special term, which is Heru Ra Ha, which you come across, I think, in the previous card, and that is a special term just for Horus. Okay, and what it's saying is that he has a dual nature. Again, I spoke about this in the previous card, but one is active and one is passive. The active form of Horus is called Ra. Kuit, and the active form is essentially here, and the passive form is called Ho Pa, sometimes spelled like that, Ho Pa Krat. And the passive form is this big figure here, the child like Horus, which is the main figure in the card. So you've got very different expressions of Horus. Essentially he's representing the duality, as the analogy would be like with Keter. It's coming down here, you've got the oneness of Keter, and eventually this is split up into parts. Quite, again, I think I went through in the previous section, where you've got a white light being split into the rainbow. So similar, so you've got the unity here, and you've got essentially the coloured universe here, which is our duality. Okay. Around Horus we've got this golden type light here, and essentially it's because he is solar in nature. You've got again a solar disk here, fire is solar, and it's this solar element which makes the goddess Nuit disappear, because she's to do with the night. So mythologically we have sun and moon, or perhaps more appropriate, just day and night. And what is this card? It's called the Aeon, which is all to do about change, and this is essentially change and the cycles which I spoke about earlier. So ultimately it's this change happening on so many different levels, and it's represented in this card in many different ways. We'll look at the top part of this figure now, the child of Horus, in a bit more detail. Oh, this is just a picture of Harpocrates, which again you can see a similar gesture here, which you can Google, and this is the type of image that will come up. But again, we're just going to stick with Horus, and you've got like a similar gesture here. So this is, it's very difficult to get a very detailed view of this, but essentially what we've got, well, I can see it any easier on this, perhaps we can. You've got these two horns projecting sideways from this headdress here. These two horns are similar to a Egyptian deity called Num, and Num is pronounced, or is spelt K-H-N-U-M. And Num was said to have created children out of clay from the banks of the River Nile. So again, you've got this idea of, if you, for instance, see the banks of clay as the all potential, and you've got children created out of that. Essentially, you've got this exactly the same scenario as what we've got with the light going in one side and being refracted out of the other. So we have the universal here, duality here, or the coloured universe. Again, we've got the universal here, and again, children out of clay is representative of duality here. We'll also go back to this because I haven't quite finished this here. One of these serpents here is over the third eye, and obviously we know the third eye is very important spiritually. It's the where the revelation of the 1,000-petal lotus occurs as consciousness moves out up through the spine and through the head chakras here. And you have this curly lock of hair here, which signifies his youth and innocence. I think that's probably about it with regards to this section. So this is Horus, the passive one. As you can see, you've got this passive figure here, and the only thing we haven't talked about is Ra-Hu-Kuit, who is this version, who is the fiery version of Horus, sat on the throne. We've got the double wand here, which we can see also in much of the wand suit. When I've gone through the minor arcana, it's very much there, the double-headed wand. It's the double wand of power in his right hand. In the left hand, his left hand here is empty. His left hand is empty because he's said to have crushed the universe and nothing remains. And so again, we have this idea of the possibility of renewal after destruction, which relates to the divinatory meaning of the card again. So in summary, if we put all this symbolism back together, we have the child Horus, who is born, and he is solar in character, as represented by the solar light around him, and he dispels the darkness of Nuit, and hence we have this cycle of time within the Aeon card. Both night and day are represented by these Egyptian deities, and they are further linked to the Aeon card, cycles, beginnings, endings. And the energy, the ruling energy of this card is fire, and fire is active, and this fire occurs in many ways in the seeker's life, but it's mainly to do with big changes in one's life. Okay, we'll move on to the next section, which is the Sun to Aeon transition. Very briefly, there's more on my website. The Sun to Aeon is basically the penultimate step of the Fool. We have the energy, the solar energy in the Sun here, and that momentum is really being focused in the Aeon card to release change in our life. So this transition is about giving up our attachments, using, as I say, using the momentum of the Sun. And so our individual sense of self is sort of burnt within this fire, so that we have a more universal perspective. So we're moving away from the duality of the twins here. So giving up our small sense of self is really not enlightenment, but really just a shift to a higher state of awareness, and it lets the final process of enlightenment, it makes that an easier transition to make, because this cycle of change that we have gone with the flow with has given rise to a much greater, if we make this a huge thing here with the person standing on top, it's a much greater perspective on life. Having gone through this sort of life wave of change, we're able to grow far more with a much more universal perspective. So all these little attachments that we've got through our life here are constantly being burned up in this fire, and this is essentially what this transition is all about. To finish this video, this is just a few pointers as to how the Aeon card could relate to a Celtic cross. So if it appears in the very first position here, it could be that a cycle of your life is ending and a new one beginning. The rest of the spread will determine how easy or difficult that this change is going to be, but it does indicate major change. Possible obstacles or challenges to the issue if the Aeon card appears in position 2. This could indicate our resistance to change, clinging on to the past, clinging on to ideals, and not letting the evolution of our self and our consciousness unfold. There's not going with the flow, that's for sure. Subconscious influences could indicate psychological issues, trauma, preventing us from moving on, those things that we don't really have a conscious grip on. So that indicates our subconscious elements that are holding us back. The past, we could have had a life-changing experience, such as a eureka moment in terms of our lifestyle, our relationships, our family. So this could be positive, or it could be a more traumatic thing, such as a major health issue rather than a decision just to change your lifestyle for the better. So again, this would depend on other cards in the reading. We now move on to hopes and goals. It could be that we just want stability and not have continuous big upheavals. Immediate future, to go with the flow, that's I think what that's telling us, and to let this change happen. Don't be afraid to let go of things that are no longer serving you, and trust in the new for your personal growth. Self-image, if the Aeon appears here, it could be that we just know that we resist change and we fear the unknown, and this is what this card is actually bringing up. If the Aeon card appears in our environment, it could indicate an environment of one of change, growth and learning. So it could be that in our environment is something that supports, like it could be a spiritual impulse, and which is giving us a much greater insight into our spiritual path. So, you know, again, depending on the spread, a very good card to get here. Guidance and warning, repeating the same destructive life cycles without taking stock and learning from your experiences. The need to stand back and assess, and to go with the flow of what you need. Overall outcome, very good, I would say. New phases of your life to bring you closer to your spiritual source. So it's strengthening your personal and spiritual development. Okay, that's just a few of the a few definitions and ideas of how the Aeon card would relate to a Celtic cross. Alright, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It has been quite long and convoluted in parts, but it's very complex symbology in this card, which in some ways distracts from this simplicity of the change. Okay, we move on to the very last card, which is the universe.